The village sleeps soundly under a blanket of heavy, humid air. As the moon hides behind thick black clouds, suddenly a disturbing noise breaks the oppressive silence of the night. It is not the familiar soft pitter-patter of rain striking the rooftops. It is a wet, heavy thud that shakes the timber frames. Then another follows. Then thousands more crash down in a chaotic rhythm. The bewildered residents rush outside with flickering lanterns, only to find their streets slick with living slime. Fish are falling from the obsidian sky in a relentless torrent. They flop and gasp on the cobblestones, dying far from any river or ocean. This is not a fable from a storybook. This is the terrifying reality of the reign of animals, where nature inverts itself. Throughout the history of mankind, we have looked toward the heavens for salvation and guidance. We expect sunlight to warm our crops and gentle rain to fill our wells. But there exists a darker side to the atmosphere above our heads. There are moments when the sky betrays us and opens up to release nightmares instead of nourishment. Historical records from the United States and beyond are filled with accounts that defy all logic and scientific explanation. These are not merely weather anomalies, but terrifying events that suggest the world above us is teeming with invisible oceans and floating graveyards waiting to spill their contents upon an unsuspecting populace. The story of the Lluvia de Peces in the department of Yarrow in Honduras serves as one of the most enduring examples of this phenomenon. It begins in the middle of the 19th century with a Catholic priest named Father Jose Manuel Subirana. He witnessed the crushing poverty of the local people and prayed for a miracle to feed them. Legends say he prayed for 3 days and 3 nights without ceasing. The sky eventually darkened, and a storm of biblical proportions tore through the valley. But when the winds died down and the sun returned, the ground was not just wet with water. It was carpeted with thousands of living sardine-like fish flopping in the mud. For the starving people of Yarrow, this was a divine gift from a benevolent creator. They collected the fish in baskets and feasted for days. However, there is a chilling aspect to this miracle that often goes unmentioned in the retelling. The fish found in Yarrow are not indigenous to the local rivers or lakes. They are blind freshwater fish that typically inhabit deep subterranean caverns where light never reaches. This implies that the storm somehow dredged these creatures from the bowels of the earth, or that they were transported from a place that human eyes have never seen. The blessing carries the weight of a subterranean curse, while the events in Honduras were welcomed as a miracle. Other occurrences of falling animals have been far more grotesque. We must turn our gaze to the United States. In the year 1876, the location was the peaceful settlement of Olympian Springs in Bath County, within the state of Kentucky. It was a clear and sunny day, without a cloud to mar the blue expanse. Mrs. Allen Crouch was outside in her yard, making soap, when the atmosphere suddenly shifted. A strange slapping sound echoed around her, as if large raindrops were hitting the dry earth. But the sky was completely clear. Mrs. Crouch looked down at the ground and recoiled in absolute horror. The objects falling from the clear blue sky were not water droplets or hail. They were chunks of raw red meat. The gruesome shower continued for several minutes, covering her yard and sticking to the wooden fences. The pieces ranged in size from small flakes to large strips several inches long. The smell of fresh blood filled the air, turning the peaceful homestead into a scene from a slaughterhouse. This event would become known in dark history as the Kentucky meat shower, and it remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the 19th century. Word of the flesh rain spread quickly through Bath County, and soon the property was swarming with curious neighbors and skeptical men of science. 2 local men named Leopold and Allen arrived to investigate the grisly phenomenon. In a display of bravery, or perhaps madness, they decided to taste the mysterious meat to determine its origin. They reported that the flesh had the distinct flavor of venison, or perhaps mutton. The idea that 2 men stood in a yard, consuming raw flesh that had fallen from an empty sky, adds a layer of psychological horror that is difficult to shake. Samples of the meat were collected and preserved in alcohol for analysis by the scientific community. The results only deepened the mystery. One analysis by the Royal Microscopical Society suggested that the tissue was indeed lung tissue from a human infant, or perhaps a horse. Another analysis claimed it was cartilage and muscle fiber. The conflicting reports created a sense of unease that rippled through the nation. If it was human remains, the implications were too terrible to consider. If it was animal, the question remained regarding how tons of butchered meat could materialize in thin air. The most popular theory put forth to explain the Kentucky meat shower is arguably more disgusting than the supernatural alternatives. Scientists suggested that a large flock of vultures had gorged themselves on a dead carcass and then taken flight. If one bird regurgitated its meal in mid-air, the others might have followed suit in a chain reaction of vomiting. The meat rain was effectively a shower of partially digested carrion falling from invisible birds. While this theory offers a natural explanation, it fails to account for the sheer volume of meat and the clean-cut appearance of the strips found on the fences. Across the ocean, another terrifying event took place in Singapore during the year 1861. A massive earthquake shook the region for 3 days, collapsing buildings and shattering the nerves of the populace. When the shaking finally stopped, torrential rains began to fall. The water levels rose rapidly, turning streets into rivers. As the floodwaters receded, the locals discovered that every puddle and pool was filled with catfish. These were not fish that had swum up from the river. They were found in enclosed courtyards and on rooftops where floodwaters had never reached. The famous French naturalist Francis de Castelnau was in Singapore at the time and witnessed the aftermath. He saw locals filling baskets with the fish that were seemingly birthed by the rain itself. The fish were of the species Clarias batrachus, which can walk on land for short distances. But the sheer number of them defied migration theories. The locals were convinced that the earthquake had cracked the sky open and shaken the fish loose from a celestial ocean. The psychological impact of seeing the heavens open up to deposit slimy, wriggling creatures is a primal fear that transcends culture. The horror of falling animals is not limited to fish and meat. In the summer of 1881, the city of Worcester in England was bombarded by a storm of periwinkles and hermit crabs. The citizens were battered by hard shells raining down with the force of hail. The creatures covered the streets and filled the gutters. Residents had to use shovels to clear the marine life from their doorsteps. The nearest coast was many miles away. To this day, nobody can explain how tons of bottom-dwelling sea creatures were lifted into the clouds and transported specifically to a landlocked city. Imagine the sound of thousands of hard shells cracking against the pavement and the slate roofs of Victorian homes. The noise would have been deafening and terrifying. It was as if the ocean had decided to invade the land from above. People hid in their basements, fearing that larger sea monsters might follow the crabs. The event left a lingering stench of brine and decay that hung over Worcester for weeks, serving as a constant reminder of the day. The natural order was violated. Perhaps the most unsettling of all these events are the reigns of amphibians. In June of 1873, Kansas City, in the state of Missouri, experienced a frog storm. The sky turned a bruised purple color, and the wind howled with a demonic fury. When the rain started, it brought down thousands of frogs. They landed on roofs and people and horses. The streets were so thick with them that carriages could not pass without crushing hundreds of the creatures. The sound of popping bodies under wagon wheels haunted the residents for years. The psychological toll of such an event is immense. You can seek shelter from water, but you cannot easily escape the feeling of a cold, wet frog landing on your neck. The frogs in Kansas City were reported to be active and hopping immediately after impact. This rules out the idea that they were sucked up by a tornado hours before, as the trauma of such a journey would likely kill them. It was as if they simply materialized a few hundred feet above the ground and fell. The cleanup operation was gruesome, and the smell of rotting amphibians lingered for a long time. In 1882 near Dubuque, in the state of Iowa, a hailstorm brought an even stranger anomaly. The hailstones that fell were large and incredibly hard. When they melted, the residents found small living frogs encased inside the ice. This suggests that the frogs were suspended in the upper atmosphere for a significant amount of time, long enough to be frozen into the center of hailstones. The image of thousands of frogs suspended in the silent freezing clouds above our heads is a nightmare worthy of the darkest fiction. How does a living creature survive being frozen in the upper atmosphere? Some scientists propose that the frogs were in a state of suspended animation, similar to hibernation. But the physics of a tornado lifting a pond of frogs into the stratosphere and keeping them there until they froze remains highly debated. The sheer energy required to keep objects aloft is massive. The precision required to drop them all in one specific location in Iowa is even more baffling. It feels less like weather and more like a targeted event. The horror escalated in Memphis, in the state of Tennessee, during the year 1877. This was not a rain of harmless fish or frogs. This was a rain of snakes. Thousands of reptiles, ranging from small garden snakes to larger venomous varieties, fell onto the city streets. The panic was absolute. People barricaded themselves in their homes, stuffing rags under the doors to keep the slithering menace out. The sidewalks were a twisting mass of scales and fangs. It was a scene straight out of a fever dream. The Memphis snake rain poses difficult questions for meteorologists. Snakes are not typically found in large groups in open fields where a tornado could easily scoop them up. They are solitary creatures that hide under rocks and in dens. For a storm to collect thousands of snakes, it would have to scour a massive area and selectively pick them up while leaving other debris behind. The selectivity of these storms is their most haunting feature. Why only snakes? Why only fish? Why only meat? In 1869, the residents of Los Nietos Township in the state of California witnessed a rain of flesh and blood similar to the Kentucky event. For 3 minutes, blood and gore fell from the sky, covering acres of cornfields. The locals, who were deeply religious, believed it was the beginning of the apocalypse. They gathered in churches, praying for salvation from the bleeding sky. The psychological scar left on the community was deep and permanent. To see the sky bleed is to see the death of hope. The phenomenon was cataloged extensively by Charles Fort, a researcher of the anomalous in the early 20th century. He proposed the existence of a super sargasso, see a place in the upper atmosphere where things from Earth are transported and held in suspension. According to Fort, there are gravitational anomalies that act as collection points. Things float there for years until a storm shakes them loose. It is a terrifying concept that the space above us is a junkyard of missing things and stolen creatures. Fort suggested that these rains are evidence of a dimension that overlaps with our own. He mocked the scientific community for their lazy explanations of whirlwinds and tornadoes. He pointed out that a whirlwind does not sort its cargo. A whirlwind takes mud and sticks and water and frogs together. But these rains are pure. It rains only frogs. It rains only periwinkles. This purity suggests a mechanism of teleportation or selection that science refuses to acknowledge because it is too frightening to contemplate. Modern times are not immune to these events. In the year 2002, the village of Corona in Greece saw fish rain from the sky. In the year 2009, tadpoles fell in the Ishikawa prefecture of Japan. In 2005, a Serbian town was pelted with thousands of frogs. The residents described the frogs as distinct from the local species and much darker in color. These events continue to happen, proving that whatever mechanism causes them is still active and still watching. The most recent significant event occurred in Texarkana, in the state of Texas, at the end of 2021. Residents reported fish falling across town, hitting car dealerships and backyards. The weather was not particularly violent, which rules out the tornadic waterspout theory. The fish simply fell from gray clouds. Security cameras captured the fish bouncing off concrete. It was a viral moment that brought the ancient fear of the sky back into the digital age. Scientific explanations usually revolve around waterspouts, which are tornadoes that form over water. The theory is that a waterspout sucks up a school of fish or a pond of frogs and carries them into the clouds. The wind currents then transport the animals over land, where they lose momentum and fall. While this is physically possible, it does not explain the uniformity of the falls. A pond contains mud and weeds and trash, yet these rains are almost always devoid of debris. It is just the animals clean and isolated. There is also the issue of the condition of the animals. In many cases, the animals are alive and unharmed. If a fish were sucked up a vortex thousands of feet into the air, subjected to freezing temperatures, and then dropped, it should be dead and broken. Yet in Yarrow and other places, the fish are lively and edible. This suggests a gentler method of transport, or a much shorter journey than meteorology can account for. The mystery refuses to be solved by wind speeds and pressure charts. Some theorists look to the concept of teleportation or portals. They argue that magnetic anomalies could open fleeting gateways between locations. A shoal of fish in the Atlantic Ocean could fall through a rift and emerge over a cornfield in Kansas. This theory aligns with the abrupt nature of the events and the lack of accompanying debris. It paints a picture of a universe that is full of holes and leaks where the laws of physics are merely suggestions. The religious interpretation remains strong in many parts of the world. The plagues of Egypt featured a rain of frogs as a punishment for the pharaoh. For those who witness these events today, it feels like a personal or community judgment. It is a reminder of human helplessness. We build roofs to stop the rain, but we have no defense against a sky that decides to drop venomous snakes or rotting meat. It creates a primal agoraphobia, a fear of the open air. Imagine walking alone at night and feeling a drop of liquid hit your cheek. You wipe it away expecting rain, but it is thick and red. You look up and see the stars blocked out by falling shapes. The sound of wet impacts surrounds you. This is the scenario that has played out for Mrs. Crouch in Kentucky and the villagers in Yarrow. It is a scenario that could happen to anyone anywhere. The atmosphere is a chaotic system, and we are at its mercy. The reign of animals challenges our understanding of reality. We like to categorize things into land and sea and sky. Fish belong in the water. Birds belong in the air. When fish fall from the air, the categories collapse. It creates a cognitive dissonance that is deeply unsettling. It suggests that our ordered world is actually chaotic and random. It implies that the rules we live by can be suspended at any moment without warning. There is a lingering dread that accompanies these stories. If fish and frogs and meat can fall, what else is up there? What other nightmares are suspended in the Super Sargasso Sea, waiting for a storm to shake them loose? Could we see rains of spiders or scorpions or things that have no name? The sky covers the entire planet. There is nowhere to hide from what falls from it. The silence that precedes these events is often described as the most terrifying part. The birds stop singing and the crickets go quiet. The air pressure drops and the hair on your arms stands up. Nature knows what is coming. The animals on the ground sense the arrival of the displaced animals from the sky. It is a moment of collective breath, holding before the unnatural deluge begins. As we continue to damage our climate and alter the weather patterns of the earth, we may see an increase in these anomalies. Stronger storms mean more powerful updrafts and more displacement of matter. The rains of the future might be more frequent and more bizarre. We are stirring the cauldron of the atmosphere, and we do not know what will bubble up to the surface or fall down upon our heads. The next time you hear the rain start to fall, take a moment to listen closely to the sound. Listen for the heavy thud that sounds different from water hitting the ground. Look at the pavement before you step out. Ensure that the puddles are just water and not filled with writhing silver shapes. The sky is vast and deep, and it keeps its secrets well until it decides to drop them on us. We live at the bottom of an ocean of air. We are the bottom feeders scuttling around on the crust of the earth. Above us are currents and tides we cannot see. And sometimes, just like the ocean, the things that belong in the deep find their way to the surface, or in our case, The things that belong in the deep find their way down to us. Sleep well and pray for a clear forecast.